While everyone debates politics, the smartest survivalists are silently abandoning entire states based on data most people will never see. These aren't your typical bug-out reasons, and the pattern they're following might shock you. California just lost over 340,000 residents in a single year. New York? Gone are 244,000 people who decided they'd had enough. Illinois watched 104,000 of their neighbors pack up and leave for good. These aren't just numbers on a government spreadsheet, they're families, retirees, and working professionals who finally hit their breaking point. But here's what really gets interesting. Pennsylvania, a state many consider affordable, hemorrhaged more than 120,000 people over just 4 years. That's like the entire city of Erie deciding to vanish. Makes you wonder what's really happening beneath the surface, right? The brutal truth is simpler than politicians want to admit. Living costs have skyrocketed beyond what most families can handle. A decent house in California now costs what a mansion used to cost anywhere else. Property taxes in New York and New Jersey are so crushing that retirees on fixed incomes are literally forced out of homes they've owned for decades. The American dream has morphed into a financial nightmare for millions. Then there's the infrastructure reality nobody talks about openly. Roads crumbling faster than they can be repaired. Electrical grids older than your grandparents struggling through every heat wave and storm. Pennsylvania's bridges are so old that driving across some feels like a trust exercise with gravity. When basic services start failing regularly, people notice weather plays a bigger role than most realize too. Sure, everyone jokes about brutal winters, but try heating a 2,000 square foot home when natural gas prices triple overnight. Illinois residents spent last winter choosing between staying warm and buying groceries. That's not a joke. That's desperation driving real decisions. The job market tells an even grimmer story. Companies are relocating their headquarters faster than moving trucks can keep up. When major employers abandon ship, they take careers, opportunities, and tax revenue with them. What's left behind? Service jobs that don't pay enough to cover the high cost of living that drove everyone else away. Well, here's where it gets personal for a lot of folks. Quality of life isn't just about money. It's about freedom, safety, and the ability to live how you choose. Many families are discovering that their paychecks might look decent on paper, but after taxes, housing costs, and basic expenses, there's nothing left for building any kind of secure future. The weird part is how quickly this migration picked up speed. 3 years ago, most people complained but stayed put. Now, moving trucks are booked solid, and real estate agents in destination states can barely keep up with demand from refugees fleeing high-cost areas. And let's not forget the ripple effect that's already starting. When productive, tax-paying residents leave in droves, who's left to fund all those government services? The burden falls on fewer shoulders, making the problem worse for everyone who stays behind. This mass exodus isn't slowing down either. But not everyone leaving these struggling states is heading to the same places or for the same reasons. Some groups have very specific needs that go far beyond just finding cheaper rent. You know what's funny? People used to prep for nuclear war or zombie apocalypses. Now they're prepping to escape their own neighborhoods. The exodus from major states isn't just about money anymore, it's about survival instincts kicking in when your daily life starts feeling like a threat. Crime rates tell the real story here. Seattle saw property crimes jump 20% in 2 years. San Francisco? Well, let's just say people stopped being shocked when they found their car windows smashed. Again, when you're constantly looking over your shoulder at the grocery store, that's not paranoia, that's pattern recognition. Smart preppers figured this out early. But here's where it gets really frustrating for the self-reliant crowd. Try buying a decent firearm in California and you'll navigate more red tape than adopting a child. New York makes you wait months for permits while criminals don't exactly file paperwork. Meanwhile, homeschooling families face regulations so strict you'd think they were running nuclear facilities instead of teaching kids math at the kitchen table. Then there's the land situation, which is honestly ridiculous. Want to buy 5 acres in Connecticut to grow your own food? Better have $500,000 lying around. Plus, good luck installing that rainwater collection system. Apparently catching water that falls from the sky requires permits in some places. Makes sense, right? The same states pushing green energy will fine you for putting up solar panels without jumping through regulatory hoops that cost more than the panels themselves. Let's not forget Mother Nature's increasing tantrums. California's fire season now lasts basically year-round. When evacuation routes become as familiar as your morning commute, maybe it's time to relocate. Hurricane Sandy taught East Coast preppers that all their emergency supplies don't matter much when flooding reaches the second floor. These aren't once-in-a-lifetime events anymore, they're Tuesday. And the weird part is how these disasters expose just how fragile urban infrastructure really is. Power grids fail, water treatment plants shut down, and supply chains collapse faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. Yet when preppers try to become more self-sufficient, they hit walls of bureaucracy designed to keep people dependent on those same failing systems. The real kicker: government overreach that makes basic preparedness feel like rebellion. Want to dig a well on your own property? Permit required. Planning to raise chickens for eggs? Better check those zoning laws. Some places even restrict how much food you can grow in your backyard garden, because apparently tomatoes are dangerous. This creates a perfect storm for anyone serious about preparedness. High costs, strict regulations, increasing crime, natural disasters, and governments that seem more interested in controlling citizens than protecting them. When your state treats self-reliance like a crime, it's not really your state anymore. But here's the thing that nobody talks about: while these challenges push preppers away from traditional strongholds, they're creating something unexpected in their new destinations. Something that's reshaping entire regions and creating opportunities that didn't exist just 5 years ago. Idaho's population exploded by over 3% in just 1 year from newcomers flooding in. That's not normal growth, that's a migration wave. South Carolina saw similar numbers, with entire neighborhoods sprouting up seemingly overnight. What's pulling all these people to places that most folks couldn't find on a map 5 years ago? The answer isn't just about escaping high taxes or crowded cities. Smart preppers are following a completely different playbook than regular movers. They're not chasing the best school districts or trendy coffee shops. They're hunting for something much more valuable: true self-reliance potential. Montana suddenly became a prepper paradise, and it's easy to see why. Land stretches for miles without a single neighbor in sight. You can actually hear yourself think out there. Texas offers similar space, but with year-round growing potential that makes food security a realistic goal rather than a pipe dream. Tennessee surprised everyone by becoming a top destination, especially for folks wanting mountain living without Montana's brutal winters. But here's where it gets interesting: these states aren't just offering more space. They're rolling out the red carpet for alternative lifestyles that would get you fined or arrested in places like California or New York. Want to collect rainwater? Go ahead. Planning to install solar panels without jumping through bureaucratic hoops? Nobody's stopping you. Building a workshop or expanding your home? The permit process won't drain your bank account or your sanity. Rural land availability changes everything for preppers. Instead of fighting over tiny suburban lots that cost a fortune, families are finding 10, 20, even 50-acre spreads at prices that seem almost fictional compared to coastal markets. One prepper couple from New Jersey bought 40 acres in rural Tennessee for less than they would have paid for a studio apartment back home. Makes sense, right? Then there's the community aspect that nobody talks about enough. These destination states aren't just attracting random people, they're pulling in folks with similar values and mindsets. Homesteaders, off-grid enthusiasts, and preparedness-minded families are clustering together naturally. The result? Neighborhoods where borrowing tools, sharing knowledge, and watching each other's backs isn't weird, it's normal. Local governments in these areas actually encourage self-sufficiency instead of regulating it to death. Wyoming doesn't care if you want to dig your own well or install wind turbines. North Carolina welcomes people who want to raise livestock and grow their own food. The contrast with heavily regulated coastal states couldn't be sharper. Well, the migration numbers keep climbing every month. Florida gained residents despite hurricane risks because the trade-off still makes sense for many preppers. Nevada's rural areas are seeing unprecedented interest from people willing to deal with desert challenges in exchange for true privacy and minimal government interference. The weird part is how quickly these changes are happening. States that were losing population for decades are suddenly scrambling to handle housing shortages and infrastructure demands. But this rapid transformation brings both opportunities and challenges that smart preppers need to understand before making their move. Moving to these prepper-friendly states isn't just about escaping high taxes and crowded cities. The real game changer? These places offer fundamentally different ways of living that most people don't even realize exist. Take growing seasons, for instance. While folks in Michigan are scraping ice off their windshields in April, families in Texas and South Carolina are already harvesting spring vegetables. Year-round growing means you can actually produce enough food to matter. We're talking about states where you can grow 3 crops annually instead of praying one summer harvest lasts through winter. That's not just convenience, it's survival insurance. Then there's the space factor, and boy does it make a difference. In densely packed areas like New Jersey, you've got 1,200 people crammed into every square mile. Compare that to Montana, where you might have 3 neighbors per square mile if you're lucky. Lower population density doesn't just mean peace and quiet. It means when things go sideways, you're not competing with thousands of panicked people for the same resources. Makes sense, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. Many of these destination states actually encourage the kind of self-reliant living that other places ban outright. Want to install solar panels without jumping through regulatory hoops? Done. Need to collect rainwater for your garden? Go for it. Planning to build that workshop or greenhouse? Most rural counties won't bat an eye at reasonable construction projects. The utility freedom alone is mind-blowing. States like Idaho and Tennessee don't just allow off-grid power systems, they make it relatively easy. Wind turbines, solar arrays, even small hydroelectric setups if you've got running water on your property. Meanwhile, back in heavily regulated states, some folks can't even install a rain barrel without permits. Let's not forget the financial breathing room these moves create. Property taxes that were eating up $8,000 annually might drop to $1,200 for comparable land. Housing costs that consumed half your income suddenly become manageable. That extra money doesn't just sit in your bank account, it goes toward building real preparedness infrastructure. Well, the natural resources tell an even better story. We're talking about regions with abundant timber for building and heating, reliable water sources that won't disappear during droughts, and wildlife populations that can actually sustain hunting. Compare that to areas where a decent fishing spot requires driving 3 hours and competing with hundreds of other anglers. The weird part is how these advantages compound over time. Lower costs mean more money for solar panels. More space means room for gardens and workshops. Fewer regulations mean freedom to experiment with sustainable living techniques. Before you know it, you're not just surviving, you're thriving in ways that seemed impossible in your old location. And the practical benefits keep revealing themselves in unexpected ways. From easier water well drilling to simpler septic systems, from local farmers markets to neighbors who actually know useful skills. But all these advantages come with a catch that smart preppers are starting to worry about. The prepper migration isn't just changing lives, it's reshaping entire regions. And the ripple effects, they're already starting to show. Take Idaho, for instance. Land that sold for $3,000 an acre 5 years ago now goes for $8,000 or more. Montana's experiencing the same price surge. What happens when your perfect prepper paradise becomes too expensive for the next wave of families trying to escape? Well, early movers got the sweet deals, but latecomers are scrambling for what's left. But here's where it gets interesting. Smart preppers aren't just buying land and going solo anymore. They're forming networks that would make any survival expert proud. Mutual aid groups are popping up everywhere. One neighbor has medical training, another knows solar installation, someone else runs a machine shop. These aren't your typical suburban book clubs. They're creating mini economies that could weather almost any storm. The weird part is how quickly local governments are adapting. Counties that never thought twice about rainwater collection or tiny home regulations are suddenly updating their codes. Some places are rolling out the red carpet for off-grid living. Others are pumping the brakes, worried about infrastructure strain. It's a political chess game happening in real time. Then there's the cultural shift nobody saw coming. Rural communities that lost young people for decades are suddenly gaining families with kids, money, and motivation. Local schools are expanding. New businesses are opening. Small towns that were practically ghost towns 5 years ago now have waiting lists for housing. Makes sense, right? But what about the states people are leaving behind? California's losing taxpayers and gaining budget problems. New York's watching entire industries relocate along with the people. Illinois politicians are scratching their heads, wondering how to fill the gaps. Meanwhile, states like Tennessee and Texas are collecting all that tax revenue and economic activity. The balance of political power could shift dramatically over the next decade. Let's not forget the infrastructure angle. Rural electric co-ops in destination states are upgrading their grids to handle more solar tie-ins and off-grid connections. Internet companies are finally running fiber to remote areas because there's actual demand now. Some regions are seeing improvements they couldn't have dreamed of before this migration wave hit, and the timing couldn't be more critical. Climate patterns are shifting, economic uncertainty is growing. Global supply chains remain fragile. The preppers who moved early aren't just getting better land prices, they're getting established before the next crisis hits. Here's the kicker. This movement is accelerating. Every family that successfully makes the transition becomes a beacon for 3 more families still stuck in expensive, restrictive states. Social media groups dedicated to prepper relocation are growing by thousands of members monthly. Real estate agents in rural areas are specializing in off-grid properties because that's where the money is flowing. The map of America is being redrawn by families who decided they'd had enough of high taxes, strict regulations, and urban chaos. The question isn't whether this trend will continue. It's whether you'll be part of the next wave or watching from the sidelines as opportunities disappear. The smart money is already moving. The rest are still thinking about it.